November 12th, 2020. My name is Christopher Saunders, and this is the Connecticut Sports Talent Show, where we talk all things talents in Connecticut. And on today's show, I'm pleased to have Ed Daigneault, who's now the retired sports writer for the Republican American,
Mhm.
was with them for over 20 plus years, and now he's in the second half of his career. But before we even get into that, I just want to say, Ed, it's great to be able to have you on, man.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
No problem. First off, I think before and there's a lot to digest and be able to kind of peel like a banana. I kind of just want to first go into the beginning of your career, all the way back, kind of the sports aspect. What got you in? When did you start going into journalism? Was it at a young age, high school, college? Tell me about it.
I was pretty young. I was a sophomore in college when I figured out what I wanted to do. And I not interned, but I did some stringing work for my hometown newspaper in Marlborough, Massachusetts. That was in, I want to say 1988, maybe 87, 88, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I just kind of followed it from there. I worked as a student newspaper at Springfield College while I was playing baseball.
Mhm.
Uh, did some work for the Springfield Republican while I was in school. I worked for the Basketball Hall of Fame for a while. And then I got out of school. There was nothing journalism wise in Massachusetts. In fact, in 1990, when I graduated, the economy was god awful in Massachusetts. So I moved to North Carolina on a whim. I just started working in hotels actually as I was working toward finding a newspaper job. Did the hotel thing for about, I don't know, a year maybe. And then I found a newspaper job in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and off I went. I spent 7.5 years in North Carolina before I moved up here to Waterbury.
How tough was it? As you said in the journalism business, it's not something where as soon as you graduate, there's a seven-figure salary waiting for you. It's like there's a lot of patience and having to work and just buying your time and waiting for an opportunity. You mentioned about working in a hotel too. Like, was there ever a point where you were like, I can't, like, I may have to give up on this because I don't have the time to wait?
No, not really. I mean, I wanted to do it. I honestly, when I graduated college, I strafed the countryside, and I mean every place in the country. I just sent resumes out, clips out, whatever I could do. And oddly enough, uh, the job I ended up taking as my first job in Rocky Mount was offered to me about 8 months before I actually took it. And the money was embarrassingly low. It was just about $10,500 a year, which 30 years ago, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was pretty normal for a small town paper. And I said, no, thanks. And I was still living in Massachusetts at the time and then moved to North Carolina. They had an opening. I reapplied for it. They hired me again at slightly more money, not a whole lot. And I jumped that time because I figured, I had heard from a lot of people that once you're in unless you really mess it up. So I took the job and I was there for a little more than a year. Within 6 months, I was a sports editor. And I guess I did good enough work for them to promote me quickly over people. And then I ended up in Burlington, North Carolina for about 5 years. I was covering a lot of high school stuff, but I also did Duke, North Carolina, NC State, Wake Forest football and basketball. So I kind of fell into a really good situation in terms of where I was. Got to do a lot of stuff. Got to really get to know a lot of really good people. Dean Smith, Mike Krzyzewski, uh, Dave Odom, who was Tim Duncan's coach at Wake Forest. Mac Brown when he was the coach at North Carolina for football the first time around. And I really just got to make some really, really good contacts and veteran people who showed me the way and just kind of took it from there.
And the relationships that you had, you mentioned Coach K, Brown, Dean Smith, guys like that. Was there, when you talked to them, did like, how was the conversation? Because I would almost feel like if I was talking to somebody as highly respected as them, I would, knowing me, I would get tongue tied because it's like, wow, I'm next to somebody who's a legend.
Right. Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
like, how did you handle that?
As best I could. It was terrifying. I'll be honest with you, it was absolutely terrifying, especially Coach K, because he's an intimidating guy, and he wasn't really terribly pleasant to the new guys from small town papers. But you just do it. It's not my comfort zone. When I got into this business, my parents thought I was insane because I was never an overly outgoing person. I was very shy. It was hard for me to talk to people. Um, but I wanted to write and I wanted to be around sports. So I just made myself do it, as uncomfortable as it was. And even to this day, I'm uncomfortable just calling people and just, I got to make myself do it. Um, but then you have these great conversations with people like Dean Smith, is absolute legend, the Hall of Famer, Coach Michael Jordan, I mean, Larry Bird, the coaching tree, Larry Brown, and all the coaches that he had there. That he's an intimidating guy, but he could not have been nicer to me. And things like that make you feel really good. Like I mentioned Dave Odom, and you're probably too young to remember him, but he was Tim Duncan's coach at Wake Forest. I mean, Tim Duncan. Dave Odom, I wanted to do a story on Tim, and Dave invited me to his office one off day, and the two of us went for a run. We talked while we ran, and then we sat in his office on the floor, just talking about Tim Duncan. That's the kind of thing. If you don't force yourself to do it, you're never going to get to experience those kind of things. So that's the kind of stuff that really sticks in my mind. Like when I first met Jim Calhoun. Now I remember Jim Calhoun because I went to when he was a coach at Northeastern. I went to some of his games because I grew up in Boston, and my father would take us. He was an intimidating guy then. When I moved here to cover UConn, I just had to kind of go up there and introduce myself to Jim. And he could be a gruff guy, but he was fine. He was pleasant. And it was one of the more nerve-wracking things I've ever done in my life. I was 29, 30 years old at the time. And you just make yourself do things, you'll be surprised at what you can do.
It's really kind of like if you don't try it, then you'll never know. If you don't open that door, if you say no, then you totally,
Exactly.
stop yourself from any. If you at least say yes and you fail or something happens, and you know what, at least you tried. But saying
At
no,
least you tried.
exactly. But like,
It, it
no, go on.
it's okay to if you feel you might embarrass yourself or you look like an idiot. You
Mhm.
know what? Okay, that's the way it goes. I mean, that's the way the business is sometimes. Any business, but especially a media business where you're bound to ask a stupid question.
Oh,
It's going to happen. You ask a dumb question, everybody makes fun of you. You're embarrassed for a couple hours, and then you move on. That's the way it goes. If you don't put yourself out there to potentially embarrass yourself or make yourself look like a fool, then you're not going to get anywhere. If you're very cautious, and I say that as a guy who I rarely ask a lot of questions in a real like open forum where there's a lot of people watching or whatever.
Mhm.
Those NCAA tournament, basketball tournament press conferences where there's 200 people sitting in there. You grab a microphone, you ask a question. I did that on occasion, but I prefer being face to face with somebody and talking in a more intimate setting, and that's fine. That even that's nerve wracking, but you need to be able to do those things, make yourself do the job to get anywhere.
I would almost think that because of your style and because of what you just said about wanting to go face to face and not, having to, in some ways ask a question in front of everybody, but rather go right to the source, go right to the coach, to the player. I would almost feel like in some ways, even at that young age, because I'm sure you had that same approach, that they respected you more for that. Am I wrong?
I would think they probably did. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but I remember an instance. There was one time it was during it was when UConn went to the Final Four and when they win the last championship, 2014.
Hmm.
They got them out of Madison Square. Yeah, they got no. That was Kemba was 2011. 2014 was Shabazz and those guys.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Madison Square Garden. They got out of they won the regional championship, but we're in New York, and those New York media guys who are by and large great, but they can be very aggressive people.
Oh,
We were in a locker room after the regional championship game, and I was camped out there waiting for Shabazz to get back from the press conference. And I'm standing there, Shabazz comes in, and I'm right in front of him, and these New York guys just keep shouting questions at him over me, like just talking over me. And Shabazz stopped him and he said, "Guys, I'm going to take Ed's question. He was here first. He's been covering us for years." And he goes, "Go ahead." That's the kind of thing, you know, the way you develop those intimate relationships and you talk face to face to guys. That I think that's where maybe where you mentioned respect. Shabazz knew me, one, two, thought enough of me to say, "You know what? You guys can wait. I'm going to take Ed's question first, and that's the way we're going to do it."
Was there ever a time where, because I've read your work throughout the years, and even when I was coming through what is, I'm still very early in my career, but the fact that I was able to learn a lot from so many people from from the Republican American, you being one of them, and because of the way you wrote, being so honest, was there ever a point with a player or a coach where maybe you said something that either he or she didn't like and they confronted you, I'm hoping face to face? And how was that? I don't even want to say confrontation, but how was that discussion? Was there ever one person that you can name right off the bat?
Oh, there are multiple times that happened. I mean, I think sports writing is not by nature a confrontational business, but it will get confrontational, especially when you're covering a guy like Jim Calhoun most of the time. All of the UConn beat writers, I'm sure, I'm certainly not in a minority here, but we all, when he was coaching, got a 6 a.m. phone call from his secretary saying, "Hello, Ed, this is Jim's secretary. Jim wants to talk to you at 6 o'clock in the morning." And then he'd chew you out for half an hour, and you go to practice later that day, and everything would be fine. That's the way it worked with Jim. He'd be really, really, really angry with you, but he'd forget about it quick. If he respected you, if he didn't respect you, he'd hold on to it for a while.
Mhm.
And he actually came after me at a press conference after an exhibition game. And I had been forewarned that he was coming for me, so I made sure that I was in the front row, right in the middle, right in front of the lectern, so he could say his piece and be done. And I actually said to him when he was finished, I said, "Are you done?" And he said, "I am." And I said, "Can I ask a question?" He said, "Absolutely." That was it. You move on. I had some issues with Edmund Saunders, Waterbury kid, when he was at UConn. Edmund and I have zero issues now. I used to when I went to the YMCA in Waterbury to work out before this whole COVID thing. I'd see Edmund there probably 3 times a week. We had the greatest conversations. I consider him a friend. But those are the things that happen. You're going to get people who are angry with you. Everybody's not going to like what you've written. Because some high school coaches haven't been happy with what I've written, but they're also friends of mine. I consider them friends. They say their piece, you say your piece, and everybody gets on with their lives like adults.
I almost feel like if honesty is something that I feel like has been lost in a multitude of ways. But I feel like if you're honest, even if there's going to be a conversation or a confrontation, as you alluded to with, because that's just how the sports writing is, at some point, they will respect you. And if they are mature and grown, they'll be like, you know what? He has an opinion. I have an opinion. You know what? We disagree, whatever. Let's move on. Wash our hands, on to the next thing. And it sounds like, as you
Exactly.
mentioned with Calhoun, and, I'm sure it was with other people as well, players, coaches, etc., to be able to do that and move on, I feel like almost makes the relationship as far as sports writer to coach even stronger, because now you know where both of you are coming from.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you let coaches, players, anybody run roughshod over you, they're not going to respect you. And if they're not going to respect you, what incentive do they have to speak to you? Um, you can't, if they know you don't have to go back at them and be a jerk about it. You can be a grown up and tactful and have class in doing it. And everything will be fine if you're dealing with an adult human being who understands that life is full of confrontation. You can't avoid it, can't run away from it. If you're going to run away from confrontation in sports writing, sports broadcasting, you're in the wrong business. If you don't have a thick skin in this business, there's zero point in being in it. If you're easily offended or any of that, like I'll tell you, I have never ever blocked anybody on Twitter. Only spam accounts. The only people I've ever blocked on Twitter, and I've had people take a run at me. So what? Who cares? I mean, the people whose opinion I care about the most live in my house. And as you get farther away from my house, the less I care about your opinion. You know, even I do care about other people's opinions, but if you're somebody who's tangentially related to me, and you have an opinion on what I wrote and you don't like it, well, okay, that's fine. I can accept that, but it's really not going to affect me in any way, shape, or form. So you have to have a thick skin. You got to be able to confront people when necessary. And you have to be able to be friendly and adult with people when necessary.
Is there a moment during your, and we'll go to the later stages because I know a lot happened, particularly in Connecticut over the last 8 to 10 years. Is there a particular moment that really kind of sticks out to you and really is a moment that you'll never forget, either in a Final Four, a championship, a regular season exhibition game, anything along those lines that you'd like to share?
Well, there's a lot in terms of the Final Fours and all of that stuff and the national championships, but it's really kind of, and there were some really, really cool moments. I mean, Kemba Walker, I remember after the 2011 national championship game, I was talking to him in the locker room after I had filed my story for the print edition. I went back in the locker room so I could do all my website work. And I was talking to Kemba, and Roscoe Smith, I think it was, pretty sure it was Roscoe, came flying across the locker room and went to hug Kemba, but I was in the way. So he ended up jumping on me and I fell on Kemba. We fell on a training table. And we all got a big laugh on it. It was funny. You know, stuff like that I remember, but what really sticks out to me is the relationships I have with the guys at the Rep Am, but also with the guys on the Yukon beat. I mean, they're some of my closest friends. Um, One in particular, Gavin Keefe from the New London paper, where we're extremely close and we spend time at each other's houses, our families get together, that kind of thing. But all those guys, Neil Ostrout at the Journal Enquirer, Dave Borges, working for Hearst Connecticut Media now, and Donald Morey from the Current. I mean, there's some of my closest friends, and I will. Those are the things that mean the most to me. The Final Fours are great. I've been to 10 of them, thanks to my time in Connecticut and North Carolina. Covered what, four national championship teams. Been to a bunch of bowl games, met some great coaches and the quote unquote famous people that you can say you know. But it's the guys who I know we're trying to beat each other's heads in every day, trying to get a story. But also every day when we're on the road, we'll go out and have dinner, have a couple of beers. You know, we're friends. That's the stuff that means the most to me. I will miss being on the Yukon beat. I'll miss it terribly, but not so much for the sports, but for the guys. I really miss the guys.
And is that kind of, culmination of your last, what was your last day at the Rep Am? I know you told me 9:45, it kind of all started to hit you. And, I
Yeah.
almost feel like it kind of everything, I don't know if like your entire career, because you've done so much, just came all in like 5 minutes. But I feel like certain memories, certain things kind of came to you as your minutes were leading up to your final night, your final time at the Rep Am.
Oh, sure. It all came flooding back. I mean, even from the time I was in North Carolina to the time, I mean, the first stories I ever did, I was in college and working for my hometown paper. And I was actually playing on a baseball team, a Stan Musial team with Mark Fidrich, the 1976 American League Rookie of the Year. He grew up in Northborough, the town next to where I grew up. He came
Really?
out yeah, he came out after he had been retired for a long time. He came out and just came to a practice one day. He said, "Guys, you need a pitcher," and we're all going, "Yeah, you're Mark Fidrich." But anyway, I ended up doing a story. I was playing on the same team as him, but I ended up doing a story on him, which was a great, great experience. And from then on, everything that I've ever done came flooding back. You know, covering guys like Vince Carter and Antoine Jameson and just these amazing players everywhere. Steve Wojciechowski and Chris Collins and Bobby Hurley. I'm so old that I covered Bobby Hurley in college, and then I covered his brother coaching UConn. Everything comes just rushing back to you, um, which is hard. But I'm not a terribly nostalgic person. I'm grateful. That's all I can say. I'm really, really, really grateful that I got to experience all of that, because I heard for years from a lot of people that I had the greatest job in the world, and I never disputed it, ever. It was a great job. Um, I would have done it forever had circumstances allowed, but um, I look back on everything and go, yeah, I did some pretty cool stuff, really cool stuff, and I met some really, really cool people and made lifelong friends. So that's what it is for me. I mean, I was never into submitting my writing for awards or anything. It just doesn't matter to me. I think I do okay. If other people like it, good. If they don't, fine. I don't need the ego boost. Um, it was just all about experiencing what I experienced and making sure I had no regrets when I was done. And I'll tell you what, I don't. I have none. I loved it. Loved every minute of it.
And it had to be great that people contacted you, texted you, tweeted at you,
Yeah.
sent you
Yeah.
messages, really telling you how much they appreciated your work. And I've always believed that. And I'm not saying that people didn't appreciate what you did while you were covering for UConn in high school and so on and so forth. But I'm a big believer in people don't truly appreciate what they have until it's gone. And I'm not saying you're dead,
Yeah.
but as
I
far as
hope not.
the but, as far as the retirement part and not being
Yeah.
able to write anymore, now people are going to be like, "Oh, Ed's not writing for you. Who's this guy? I want Ed back." You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
that's when it's really
Yeah.
going to hit people.
Yeah, that would be it would be cool if people thought that. And I caught a little guff from a couple guys in the office because I didn't do any kind of farewell column or anything. Because quite honestly, I didn't think anybody cared, and I sure don't care. I'm not there anymore. They'll figure it out eventually. Um, I'm not sure I had that big an impact. I mean, it was great to hear. It's just great to get messages from everybody, the people on Twitter, the readers. Great. It's phenomenal. And I really appreciate it. Never knew I had that sort of influence or impact on anybody. Never knew that people read my stuff all that widely. I'm glad they did. I'm eternally grateful that they did. It was a chapter in my life. Like I said, I'm not an overly nostalgic person. It was awesome. Don't regret any of it. But yes, whatever uh, pats on the back I got, whatever compliments I got, or I, I can't express to you how appreciative I am of those, and I will cherish them. But my time's done. I'm not dead. I'm still around. I've seen some of the high school coaches that I cover have been at the brewery in the last few weeks. I'll see people. I'm not overly concerned about that, and I'll be in contact with the people I'm closest with. So I do appreciate what people have said about me. It kind of feels like a eulogy a little bit, but I hope there's no eulogy coming anytime soon.
And I hope not either, for everybody's
Thank
sake
you.
and for your family as well. You know,
Yeah,
I,
thanks.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about kind of what's been going on with high school sports itself. I mean, what went on in the fall, I mean, with football and that whole spiel, I mean, that could go on forever. But I think with what we're dealing with as far as with the winter sports, I know they put off the start date. Now I saw it from the current, they reported that a decision will be made on Tuesday as far as when winter will start. And I guess the question I have for you is kind of what's your thought process on this whole thing? Because I'm sure you have a lot to say.
I I do. I tend to err on the side of being safe. Um, because this virus is a real thing. It's nothing to mess with. That said, I have a daughter in high school who plays soccer and is a very good basketball player, and probably won't have a basketball season. I'd like to see them play, but I don't think it will happen. But as I told her tonight at the dinner table, she was asking me what's going to happen. All this stuff. I said, I don't know. I'm on the outside now. I don't have the same kind of information. I don't know. I don't see how they're going to play basketball. I don't understand why they didn't play football. Didn't make a whole lot of sense to me outside in the warmer weather for the most part, but they could play soccer, which isn't overly different. I mean, they're obviously not hitting each other with the same verve, but I think the CIAC I believe they were the first in the country in March to shut everything down,
Yep.
which turned out to be a pretty prescient move. And at the time, I criticized it. I thought they were panicking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and man enough to say that they made the right move, and I was wrong as wrong can be. Um, but I think they're going to try to push forward with the winter stuff as much as I can. I think they've already killed wrestling, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, they have.
Which, yeah, there's not a whole lot of wrestling around here, but how are you going to play basketball with a mask on? That's what my daughter wants to know. It's impossible. You're running up and down the court wearing a mask. That's not going to work. I think they're probably better off just ditching winter sports at least until maybe late January, and then maybe going from there. But then obviously you run into a backup in the spring sports, and spring being the shortest season because it's you don't have a lot of time to get that stuff in. So I'm as curious as anybody else right now to see what happens. If I
Well,
had any inside info, I'd give it to you.
oh, I would love that, you know.
I don't have any. I'm on
Well,
the outside now, man.
hey, it's all right. You still have a lot of contacts. But to go back to what you said, the Springs already missed a season. And if you
Right.
force them to miss another, I mean, we already mentioned about the winter. My biggest thing is, and I even said this when they came out with the date for the winter sports, and I said, what's the rush? Because as soon as I saw it, I sent it to a buddy of mine in the NVL, one of a football coach, and I said, this is going to be pushed because this virus is going to get worse because of the conditions, the cold and everything else, flu and whatnot. So I told him, I was like, what's the rush of having a date? Why don't you wait and see? Because now you keep kicking this down the road. It's going to get to a point now where you put down a date, and if you switch it again, the backlash is going to be 10 times worse.
Absolutely. I They need to make a decision and go with it. Um, I think what they're making a decision Tuesday. I
Correct.
don't see how they're going to start any winter sports before Christmas. I really don't see that. And I heard today that New Jersey is going back to phase one in their COVID response because they had something like 10,000 new cases in the last week or something. My wife's family is all from New Jersey, so it's very real to them. Um, I, I, I I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. And there really, when you're dealing with something like this, there is no right answer. You just do the best you can do and hope. You got to keep people safe. Now, I understand schools aren't huge super spreaders of this thing. Um, However, that doesn't mean they can't be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
No, I do.
it seems to me that right now, at least in Watertown here, where you get most of the cases that are coming up in schools are in the elementary schools. Now, whether they're teachers or kids, we don't know for obvious reasons because of privacy laws. But because those kids aren't, they're all in one place the whole time.
Mhm.
They're not separated from each other in pods. So that has something to do with it. Now, high school is obviously a different situation because the kids are moving around, and Watertown high schools, and my daughter goes half the alphabet goes Monday, Tuesday.
Mhm.
Nobody goes on Wednesday. The other half go Thursday, Friday. To actually physically go to school. So, and that seems to have worked out. She's been playing soccer. There's been no issues with her team. Now there have been issues with others. Um, I don't know the answer. I really wish I could have an answer beyond let's get a vaccine so we can all move on with our lives.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping for and praying for, like everybody else.
Oh, 100%. I think, just thinking, just for the sports side and the athletes, you think about the football players, you think about potentially the winter sport athletes and even the spring athletes, depending on where we are with this pandemic and such, because you have young men and
Right.
women that are trying to go to college, trying to enjoy what's left of their career. I mean, I was talking to a coach from Glastonbury who told me that a couple kids from the shoreline were reportedly trying to end their life because they were so psychologically defeated that they felt like what's the point. And I think that's
Yeah.
where you know I think as a society, as a community, as coaches, as a school, I believe that if there is no sports, if there ends up not being a winter season, then I think there really needs to be, and I mentioned this to the CIAC, I mentioned this to Lungarini when I had him on this podcast, asking him if there was a plan for something if these kids are in this position as we've now seen. And
Mm.
there wasn't a plan at the time. I hope there will be because now there's been a lot of time to be able to think about something because now there has to be a focus on the kids, on teachers, on coaches, because they're stressed and there's a
Yeah.
lot going on.
The mental health aspect I think is largely been overlooked. We've taken a lot of time, my wife and I, to talk to my younger daughter about all of that. Now, fortunately, she's a really even keel kid and she's very realistic and she gets it. Um, and not everybody's like that. Um, my older one is a freshman in college, and they just went to all online classes 2 weeks ago. So she's been home, and she didn't want to be home. She didn't expect to be home, and that's taken a toll on her, regardless of the sports thing. Now, you and I know athletes are dependent on these things. Even if they're not kids who are going to be recruited, it's very important to just be part of a team and have that outlet. Um, it's just hard. I know my younger one's got a her soccer season was ended because the NVL stopped the postseason experience was canceled, and she's got just a practice on Saturday just for fun to hand their uniforms, and she's really looking forward to it just to get out there. Um, I don't know how the CIAC or any really high school organization could address the mental health issue in itself, by itself, just because of limited resources and whatever. I think that's kind of got to start a little bit at home. Well, it certainly has to start at home.
Mhm.
It has to happen in school too, but as you said, the teachers are stressed. Everybody's stressed. Everybody needs to somehow be able to manage that stress. Um, Now, people all manage it differently. I don't know. The mental health thing is a huge issue, regardless of sports or not. Even for, say, kids like in the band, they're not playing at football games. They're not having these concerts. They're not having the rehearsals that they'd normally be in. These things matter to kids, and there's got to. I think as a society, maybe we clearly have to pay larger attention to mental health issues. I mean, that's unquestionable. But I don't know how you do it as a high school sports organization,
Mhm.
beyond offering whatever resources you may have in terms of counselors or whatnot. Maybe doing Zoom calls like this with the groups of athletes and getting people together just to talk about it, just to have that sense of connection, I guess. But also the CIAC's got an awful lot on his plate right now, an awful lot.
Yeah, he was lambasted on Twitter left and right during the whole football, you know, on, off, on, off. I mean, again, like when
Yeah,
I had him on, he has a couple boys. I saw people saying on Twitter how he wanted to ruin the careers of the high school players, and I kind of was like, no, he's not
no.
doing that. And again, I told this again. I keep referring back to my buddy, but I told him this when
Yeah,
all this was going on with Longarini and him being attacked, and I was like, to be honest, I think Longarini in some ways was kind of like the sacrificial lamb. Like he's the guy showing his face, so let's blame him. But it's
right.
not really just him. It's a collective. There's so many people involved that we don't
No,
even know
absolutely,
about. You know.
absolutely. There's no way. I mean, and I feel bad for these kids. My older one didn't have her graduation this year. I mean, I watched her graduate from the front seat of my car. It sucked. I mean, it's not what I wanted. It's not what she wanted. She didn't have a senior prom. She missed her last track season, which to her wasn't a huge deal because she's a soccer freak. But um, I think ultimately, if this last year is the worst thing that happens in these kids' lives, they're doing pretty well. They're doing pretty well. I mean, we've had kids who losing. There was a soccer player at Kennedy High School, just lost his mother. His mother passed away. I mean, you think he's thinking about his senior soccer season being cut short? I'm sure it bothers him, but he's got bigger issues on his plate. And I get the kids who are being recruited want to play in college. Well, the schools are going to find a way to work around this whole COVID thing. They have to, because their colleges are dealing with the same thing too. I don't. It's something like the last 2 weeks there. I don't remember what the number was. It was something like 25 or 27 college football games canceled or postponed just in the last 2 weeks.
Mhm.
It's an insane number because of this virus. So Quite honestly, if this, I'm sorry, moving around, but if it's the worst thing that happens up to this point in their lives, they've been pretty blessed. They really have. You
That's
know,
a
we've
great
all
point.
dealt with crappy stuff, but this is something we have absolute zero control over. So you just got to ride it out.
Exactly. And you know what? We'll end it right there. And I really do appreciate you coming on and be able to share your insight
My
as well.
pleasure, man. I
You
appreciate it.
know, as well as being able to share some stories. And I mean, I could talk to you forever, but I don't want to keep you from your family. And like, I'd love to have you come back on in the future because
Yeah,
you have so
absolutely.
much stories and knowledge. And, I would love to be able to hear more about them. I really would.
Sure, sure. I could talk forever, which is kind of surprises me because I'm not all that talkative. So thanks. I appreciate it.
No
I got to
problem.
keep my hand in. I got to keep my hand in it too. So
Have to.
whenever you need me. Yeah, absolutely. I'll be doing it.
Wrap things up in the Connecticut Sports Talent Show. So until next time, stay safe. Remember, CT stands for Connecticut Talent, and I'm on a journey to find them all. Have a good one, everybody, and be well.